I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and Team Lead for the Valuing Black Assets Initiative. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the event Examining Racial Bias in Home Appraisals, a screening of Our America, Lowballed. Today we will explore a prevalent aspect of housing discrimination that has been mainly overlooked until this moment in which we now find ourselves. In 2018, when Brookings published The Devaluation of Assets in Black Neighborhoods, authored by Jonathan Rothwell, principal economist at Gallup, David Harshbarger, formerly of Brookings, and me, we knew that we made a significant contribution to policy research. We showed that homes in Black majority neighborhoods in metro areas across the country were on average priced 23% or $48,000 lower than their mostly white counterparts. That 23% amounts to $156 billion in lost equity. To that point in time, housing devaluation was mostly an issue that Black homeowners talked about and suffered with privately. Suddenly, Black families possess the empirical evidence for what they have known for generations. They are lowballed. To put $156 billion in perspective, that amount in 2018 could have started more than 4 million Black-owned businesses based upon the average amount Black people use to start their firms. It could have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based upon the average cost of a four-year public university. $156 billion could have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan more than 3,000 times over, covered all of nearly Hurricane Katrina damage, and it's more than double the economic burden of the opioid crisis. $156 billion is a big number. In the years to follow the report's release, individual families and researchers looked for causes for the value gap, and they understandably looked at appraisers since they are outwardly charged with valuating homes. Since we released our 2018 housing report, there have been numerous news stories and now a documentary about how Black homeowners whitewashing their homes, replacing the Black art, books, clothing, and hair products with those that would signal a white person lived in the house, resulted in higher valuations. The government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, issued their own reports corroborating our results. While our original research found that homes are undervalued in Black majority neighborhoods, we could not fully explain why. Recently, the Federal Housing Finance Agency released new neighborhood-level data on home appraisals. Using this data in combination with other sources, Jonathan Rothwell and I, in December of 2022, released another report titled How Racial Bias in Appraisals Affects the Devaluation of Homes in Majority Black Neighborhoods. We continue to find that homes in Black neighborhoods are valued roughly 21% to 23% below their valuations would be in non-Black neighborhoods, which is about $44,000 lost per home, resulting in $162 billion in lost equity across the country. Adjusting for characteristics of homes and neighborhoods, we also find that appraisal transactions in majority Black neighborhoods are nearly twice as likely to be appraised under the contract price than homes in majority white neighborhoods. We estimate that the median appraisal is 15% lower in majority Black neighborhoods compared to homes in neighborhoods where the share of the Black residents is less than 1%. Overall, bad appraisals account for upwards of 20% of the value gap. Clearly, appraisals and appraisers are a factor. Jonathan and I plan to continue to account for other factors that rob people of wealth and opportunity. However, we are here today because homeowners, fair housing advocates, journalists, and politicians know they have value. Self-worth inspires demand. Speaking on behalf of the entire Valuing Black Assets Initiative team, we are proud that we can give people the price to stand on. And I can say this, full-heartedly. When you work at a think tank, we think we are creating an impact. But as you see here, you have films, legislation, an administration taking action. This is a dream for someone like me. So I just want to thank you, but you can clap to that. But there is value in truth. During a time when people are just spouting lies and falsehoods, we can still rally behind truth, and that's what I argue is the true impact of any research. But one of the folks who truly values truth that I found is Lisa Rice. And, we can only release data, and it's up to the public to do what they do to get change. And Lisa Rice, I can say this, a lot of this would not happen without her leadership. Lisa Rice is the president and chief executive officer at the National Fair Housing Alliance, or NAFA. NAFA is the only national organization dedicated solely to ending discrimination in housing. Its national affiliates have been instrumental in bringing cases of appraisal discrimination to light. After Lisa speaks, she's going to introduce some special guests. That I know you're not here to see me, you're here to see the special guests. But I would just want to take care of a few housekeeping items before I bring Lisa up. If you're compelled to post on social media, please follow at Brookings Metro using the hashtag appraisal bias. Take pictures, tweet out, do your Instagram thing, and we'll make this happen. But last but not least, I want to bring up Lisa Rice, who will introduce herself and our special guests.
Andre, thank you so very much. And I must also thank the Brookings Institution for hosting today's program and for all of the work that you have done to make this incredible event possible. Dr. Perry's leadership and pioneering research made tangible what so many families experience when their homes are devalued. As the Lowballed documentary shows, the erasure of a family's essence in the place that is their refuge is an attack on their dignity. His research also demonstrates how appraisal bias is not a bug of the system, but rather a feature that requires systemic reform to repair. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge NAFA's Senior Counsel, Maureen Yap. Maureen, would you please stand? Talk about a truth teller. I want to thank Maureen for her leadership in steering NAFA's groundbreaking study, Identifying Bias and Barriers, Promoting Equity, which was released last year in collaboration with the Dane and Christensen law firms. The groundbreaking report is the most comprehensive review of bias in the appraisal industry to date, and it presents a roadmap for Congress, regulators, advocates, and the industry to address the nation's long legacy of inequities in the valuation of real estate. I also would be remiss if I did not thank Julian Glover, this amazing reporter and truth seeker, who is now a director, Spielberg Lookout, and ABC for producing this amazing and incredible documentary, Our America Lowballed. A year before his assassination while in Chicago at the launch of the Poor People's Campaign and the fight for open housing, Dr. Martin Luther King said, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children." Just 7 days after his assassination, the landmark Fair Housing Act was passed on April the 11th, 1968. Today's program is the first in a series this year where NAFA would be co-hosting 55th Fair Housing Act anniversary events with key partners like the Brookings Institution to ensure we can advance a blueprint for housing equity and racial justice. And now it is my distinct privilege and esteemed honor to present a woman who really needs no introduction, Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Serves as the ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee and has made history as the first woman and first African American to chair the very powerful and influential House Financial Services Committee, where she has championed fair and affordable housing and the needs of marginalized people like no other committee chair in recent memory. Her legislative victories include expanding funding for fair housing enforcement and pushing for billions of dollars in funding to keep renters and homeowners housed during the COVID pandemic. Congresswoman Waters, you might have heard, has experienced a death in her near family, and for that reason is not able to physically be here with us today. But this event was so important to her that in the midst of her grief and her time with her family, she recorded remarks for us. And now we will hear her remarks.
And thank you, Ms. Rice, for that very kind introduction. I would also like to thank everyone at the Brookings Institution and the National Fair Housing Alliance for co-hosting this event. Your commitment to ending discrimination and creating equitable housing opportunities for all is making a difference in the lives of millions of people across the country. I would also like to thank the families who participated in the docuseries, Our America Lowballed, who shared their stories to highlight and to help root out ongoing appraisal bias and discrimination. We applaud your bravery and tenacity in sharing these harmful and dehumanizing experiences, which mirror those faced by too many families of color all across the country. Home ownership is undeniably a cornerstone of the American dream. With it brings a level of economic security and an opportunity for families to build generational wealth, invest in their communities and their future. Unfortunately, as housing grows increasingly expensive with rising interest rates, owning a home has moved further out of reach than ever before. This is especially true for younger home buyers, people of color, and those who lack intergenerational wealth. In fact, the gap between Black and white homeownership rates have reached a 120-year high. The gap between Latinx and white home ownership rates lags by more than 25 percentage points. However, even when historically excluded individuals from Black and Latinx communities do reach their dreams of home ownership, as Julian Glover has rightfully highlighted in ABC's recent docuseries episode, their homes and communities are lowballed, as the people title Our America Lowballed conveys. Make no mistake, these gross racial disparities are byproducts of systemic racism, including the lasting legacies of slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, and other policies that not only target Black people and other communities of color, but that live on through the home valuation process. This is why, as chairwoman of the House Committee on Financial Services, I led the first hearing on appraisal bias and discrimination in 2019. So we took a close look at appraisal disparities and worked closely with the industry, which had made a lot of promises to do better. However, during the pandemic, we saw more and more reports, research, and evidence of ongoing appraisal discrimination. Last March, following major federal reports on the issue, I convened the committee's second appraisal hearing with an important goal of discussing ongoing bias and discrimination within the industry, its effects on homeowners and communities of color, and, most importantly, to discuss urgent solutions like those proposed in my bill, the Fair Appraisal and Inequity Reform Act, otherwise known as the FAIR Act. This bill would address appraisal bias and discrimination by strengthening the federal oversight structure of the industry, streamlining the fair housing complaint process, and making key appraisal data available to the public, among many other important provisions. As we saw in the docuseries, there are Black and Latinx families across the country who for generations have been forced to whitewash their homes to avoid housing and appraisal discrimination by removing their family photos, memorabilia, and other traces of Blackness and replacing them with pictures of fictitious white families. It is unacceptable that in 2023, appraisal bias and discrimination are still a reality for homeowners and communities of color, despite federal laws like the Fair Housing Act that prohibit such practices. And sadly, despite what some may say, these stories are not simply anecdotes. A growing body of studies have exposed this egregious trend of appraisal inequity, where white homes are valued 2 times higher than those in Black and Latinx neighborhoods. And during the pandemic, we saw Black homeowners like Ms. Duffy, who were denied the opportunity to refinance their mortgages or take equity from their homes during a historically low interest rate environment due to lowballed appraisals. These practices have damaging and intergenerational effects on families and entire communities, as was also highlighted by the story of Austin and Curtis families in my state of California. As we know, an appraiser has the power to determine a home's value, which is the key driver of wealth for the majority of families in the United States. Bias and discrimination in this process artificially lower home values for homeowners of color, lock people of color out of home ownership opportunities, and contribute to the widening of the racial wealth and home ownership gaps. So, combating unfair and discriminatory appraisals is absolutely critical to closing our nation's wealth gap and making good on the promise of fair housing for all. So as we continue to push for legislative and administrative reforms to overhaul this broken system, it is critical that people continue to report potential discrimination and share their stories. I'd like to thank Dr. Perry, the Brookings Institute, and other researchers, the National Fair Housing Alliance, and Julian Glover with ABC News for their critical work that has helped keep this issue at the forefront. There is so much work to be done to eliminate systemic disparities in appraisals once and for all. Our nation deserves a home valuation system that everyone can rely on, no matter who they are or where they live. This requires a valuation system that is safe, sound, and fair. We must continue to sound the alarm until we see extensive and impactful change in the appraisal industry. Thank you so very much.
And now I am deeply humbled to introduce a woman who has become my friend, a woman to whom I look up to tremendously. I got to keep it together. Here's why I have to keep it together. What a difference a year makes. Because I went from a HUD secretary who had the audacity to ask me to my face, why is fair housing so important? To a HUD secretary who, in my very first meeting with her, when I asked her, would she please make fair housing a priority at HUD, said with no hesitation, of course, it was already on my list. The incredible and the Honorable Marcia Fudge is the 18th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and one of the most fervent champions for fair housing and housing equity that I have ever seen. If I could, I'd make her secretary for life. Under her leadership, you heard Representative Waters explain that in 2019, the Black-white homeownership gap had grown so large that it was as large as it was in 1890. But with the championship of Secretary Fudge, in both 2020 and 2021, we saw the Black and Latino homeownership rates increase, and the Black-white homeownership gap and the Latino-white homeownership gap reduce. She has worked with intentionality to break down the barriers that have prevented generations of people of color from accessing fair housing and lending opportunities. She, along with Ambassador Susan Rice, lead the PAVE task force, which released its action plan for rooting out bias in home appraisals. And she has been ardent in pushing for the implementation of every strategy under that plan. We are so privileged to have her with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, please help me welcome Secretary Marcia Fudge.
I'm going to take Lisa on the road with me. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. It is always good to be with people who believe the things you believe. And let me say that for the speakers ahead of me, it is just clear. It's just hard to be Black in America today, no matter your station in life. Trust that I know. I want to first thank, of course, Dr. Perry and Brookings and my friend Lisa Rice and the Fair Housing Alliance. My team, I have a number of staff here today. Would they just please stand up so you can see all of my staff that is here today? They are committed to this work. First thing I told my staff when I took this position, someone asked me, they ask you all kind of crazy questions because they don't know who you are. So they asked me, what do I see as success? And I said, what I see as success is that when we leave this place, people will know we gave our best. They will know that we made people feel seen, and that they will have hope that this government can finally work for them. And that is who these people are. So give them another round of applause. I want to thank Carlette Duffy and the Curtis family, and Maxine alluded to you all earlier, the advocates and appraisers who shared their insights in this documentary. Mr. Glover, and everyone at ABC7, thank you for amplifying the voices of people in this country who have had to confront appraisal bias and its consequences. It is bigger than people know. You made real an issue that is deeply personal to me, and one that the Biden-Harris administration has been working to address since day one, and I'm grateful for your fortitude, because I live in a community that is all Black, and my home is undervalued. It has been nearly 55 years since the Fair Housing Act, and you will soon see in the video very, very plainly the appraisal system in the United States put on display for all to see, the very inequities the law sought to root out 55 years ago. Home ownership is the way many people in this country build savings and wealth. It allows people to improve not only their lives, but the lives of the generations that follow them. So I was fortunate. I was a kid who grew up in a house with generations of people in it. It was that house where my great-grandparents, and my aunt and uncle and their 6 kids lived on one side. My mother, my aunt, my grandparents lived on the other side, and whoever moved from the South stayed with us till they found some place to go. But it was my home. It was a place that made me feel safe. Never had to worry about people who didn't care about me. It was my home. And so owning a home really does provide a clear and direct path to the American dream. I believed as a kid that if I worked hard enough, I could be anything I wanted to be. Children today do not believe that because their dreams have been deferred. Most Black and brown children's dreams have been deferred. And we have consistently had our homes undervalued, and we are told that we are not worthy. We have been told that where we live, where we raise our children, where we celebrate birthdays and host holidays is worth less for no other reason than our race. Having your home undervalued is bigger than just a number on a page. It can be the difference between getting a home, a loan, or not, between having enough money for your retirement or not. It can determine whether your children or your children's children have access to broader and better opportunity. The economic consequences are real, and they are clear. But the impact this level of systemic and pervasive bias can have on hardworking people's well-being cannot be overstated. This has been yet another signal to Black and brown communities that our systems do not see us as equals. Think about what that does to a person. Think about how it would feel for you to have to remove everything in your home so that it could be sold. Think about it. Not only, though, has the Biden-Harris administration thought about it, we have decided to do something about it, to try to right the historic wrongs. So through the PAVE task force, which is chaired by Ambassador Susan Rice and me, and it is led by Melody Taylor, who is here right now. Melody, stand up so they can see who you are. We put forward the most wide-ranging set of reforms ever to advance racial equity in the home appraisal process. We're focused on empowering consumers, making the appraisal industry more accountable, cultivating a well-trained appraiser workforce, one that looks like the communities it serves, and making sure that technology does not perpetuate bias. At HUD, we have been especially focused on helping consumers and borrowers. For decades, the appraisal complaint process has been one-sided. Lenders have been the only people who could request a reconsideration of value if there appeared to be some issue. But borrowers have few avenues for recourse of their own. So having a system that is a check on itself has not worked, and we are looking to change it. That's why I'm happy to announce that HUD, through the Federal Housing Administration, is creating a process that people seeking FHA financing can use to request a review of their appraisal if they believe the results may have been skewed by racial bias. This will mean that a homeowner who is in the process of refinancing their home with FHA can take steps to ensure their appraisal is fair. A preview of that update is available for your feedback on our drafting table platform, so I strongly encourage you to take a look. And that is not all. We have established a uniform approach to investigating complaints of bias against appraisers, appraisal companies, and lenders. We have provided funding that can be used for testing and educational outreach. At the end of this month, HUD's Offices of Housing Counseling and Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity will launch a 3-part training series on appraisal bias for our counseling agency partners. The training will begin with a critical conversation on racial bias in this process, because we know that there are some solutions that we can use to combat discrimination. And throughout the series, we will talk with people with lived experience. And you know, sometimes that word drives me a little crazy because all of us have a lived experience in something. But for those of us who's been discriminated against, it's a different kind of lived experience. So through all of this, we want Americans to get help, to get informed, and to get involved. For generations, we have allowed racial inequity to fester, like an open wound that infects all of our systems. But under my leadership and the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris, we're doing everything in our power to root it out once and for all. Lisa, I'm going to reinforce what you said about Dr. King. These words exactly. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. Now is the time to open the door of opportunity for all God's children. It's our America, and we cannot accept any more lowballing. Thank you so much.
I'm going to ask that everyone please remain in the room and seated. As the secretary exits the building, please stay in the room. I know you want to rush out and give her a handshake or a hug, but it's my pleasure to introduce this wonderful documentary. So without further ado, let's look at Lowballed.
Families who say appraisals on their homes are low and that race is likely a factor.
They believe they were hit with a lower home value because of the color of their skin.
That's how one couple describes their experience when getting an appraisal on their home. And they say that it was undervalued simply because they are Black.
As a reporter covering race and social justice, I didn't exactly set out to become an expert on the home appraisal process. When you even say the word appraisal, most people just kind of look at you with a blank stare. But really, for the last 2 years, that's pretty much been my life, telling the stories of Black and brown families who believe they've had their homes valued for less. They've had their homes devalued. They've been lowballed. And they believe the color of their skin is the big reason why.
We had a conversation with one of our white friends, and she is like, no problem, I'll be Tanisha.
So it appraised for 1.482.
Almost 1.5, $500,000 more.
And like, how does that happen?
So the property was never the question. It was who was occupying the property at the time of the appraisal that was the question.
The only thing bringing down the value of my home was me.
It's one of those stories that you start digging into, and all of a sudden it just balloons and becomes bigger and bigger.
Countless families have reached out to our race and social justice reporter, Julian Glover, with stories of racially biased appraisals.
Well, I was initially shocked, and I thought I was seeing something different than what I was seeing.
It doesn't feel good. So to have somebody come and stand in, and then we get to all of a sudden a higher value.
How could the other appraisal be so off? And we're not off. She's off. How can she be so off?
It confused the loan agent.
So that was really the red flag.
You never think that somehow you would be the victim of discrimination.
We now aren't able to pass on to our 19-month-old and to our unborn child, and not because the house wasn't worth that, but because we're Black.
And throughout that process, over the last couple of years, two things have really become crystal clear. The first is it's really important that we all understand the home appraisal process. As we know here in America, owning your own home is truly the pathway to the American dream. But if your home isn't being valued properly, you're essentially being cheated out of that dream. The second thing is that the home appraisal process appears to be broken, or at least broken for Black and brown families.
Home owned to this day by a Black American family is usually appraised at a low rate for a similar home owned by a white family.
I think what we're seeing out of this is that the problem is extremely widespread. The bias and discrimination is so baked into our housing process.
The house is the house. Why would you go through such ridiculous lengths to belittle Black people and devalue them?
The system itself is so broken.
Your home is valued for $25,000 less than 2 doors down from you.
Correct.
How does that happen to the HUD secretary?
Because I live in a Black neighborhood.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel.
It's extremely frustrating because you just find it so hard to make a breakthrough.
That's not what you call regulation. That's not what you call oversight. That's not, of course, what you call fairness.
This isn't just adults trying to get an appraisal, but there's an impact on a whole family.
I'm ready to fight, whatever it takes to fight.
This cannot continue. Cannot.
Over the next hour, we're going to put the entire appraisal industry under the microscope, and we're going to get some answers to some questions that have been on my mind for the last couple of years.
Why are homes up to 30 times more likely to be lowballed in an appraisal in the poorest black and brown neighborhoods than in the wealthiest white neighborhoods? Why is the appraisal industry being called the whitest industry in the country? How does a home value jump $500,000 when a white family stands in for a black family? And perhaps the most important question of all, what's being done to fix all of this?
To get these answers, you're going to meet 3 different families who've been lowballed an average of $300,000 on their home's worth. Each of these families have taken a different approach to try and right a wrong they believe is all because of the color of their skin. And for the Austins in Marin City, that difference was black and white.
I love the community aspect of Marin City. Hey, Bob. How you doing? That's good. Everybody knows everybody around here, right? I mean, it's like true community, you know, and how fortunate we were, even though sometimes you'd be like, oh, I gotta go here, I gotta go there.
Always have eyes watching you too.
Oh, all the time.
Paul Austin was born and raised here in Marin City, California.
What's up, Lou?
It's a small and tight-knit community just 5 miles north of San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge.
Marin City was birthed out of World War II. Even though Marin City ended up being a red line community, it still has pushed forward. We come together in times of need to stand up. Because if we didn't, Marin City had already been gentrified like a lot of the other black communities here in the Bay Area. So my grandparents, like most people grandparents now, they migrated from the South to work in the shipyards during World War II. And so they saved up their money and they was able to buy this piece of land and build this for generations to come. So, you know, I do appreciate them 100% because without them, there would be no me.
And still to this day, Marin City is really, you know, an enclave of black folks.
100%, 100%.
When shipbuilding jobs disappeared, white workers were able to move out of Marin City to find new job opportunities. They would go on to live in all-white neighborhoods, the purity protected by racially restrictive covenants. But black people who lived in those houses and called Marin City home were unable to move due to housing discrimination and redlining, like Paul's grandparents, making Marin City the stronghold of the black population for the entire county, still true to this day.
This is my grandmother's house.
Right here.
Right here. Just really good memories of us being here. She had a garden all the way in the back.
80 years since the city's founding, the grandson of that shipyard worker who fought for this home to be built is still fighting.
So my mom's house is the blue house.
Okay, right here.
Right there. So that's where I grew up because of our grandparents. They gave her the money for a down payment to be able to help her and my Aunt Faye be able to get their homes. So, you know, that's what it's all about, is being able to help others. So that's where I want to be. I want to be in that position to help my daughter and my son to be able to get them a home wherever they may land.
And think about how that would have been so much more difficult.
Would it?
If that lower home value stuck.
Yes.
And tonight, a look at the growing inequity in home ownership rates in the Bay Area. ABC 7 News race and culture reporter Julian Glover has the story of a Marin couple who almost got cheated out of $500,000.
You know, it was work, but it was exciting.
Paul and his wife Tanisha Austin felt like they captured a slice of the American dream in 2016 when they purchased their first home together, this original Marin City pole home. But it wasn't without challenges.
As soon as like a house came on the market, you go in, you put your bid in, and then you get outbid it by like 100,000 or more rather quickly. And that can be, you know, a little bit depressing.
They bought the home off market from another black family hoping to make homeownership a reality for a young black couple.
After moving into the home built in the 1960s, the Austins staged major renovations, adding an entire floor and more than 1,000 square feet of space, along with a deck, new floors, a fireplace, and new appliances. Then they got it appraised.
I read the appraisal, I looked at the number, and I was like, this is unbelievable.
The family tells me the appraiser was an older white woman, and they're convinced race was a factor. The home appraised for $989,000, just $100,000 more than the Austins got it appraised for before they started the work.
What's going through your mind when you get that first appraisal that you feel is just too low?
Oh, I'm upset. I'm sad, I'm upset. There's a bunch of things. Like, how's this gonna impact the rate that we're trying to get? How's this gonna impact the money that we're trying to take out of the house to, finish everything up? It was deflating because I knew what other properties had sold for. And so you're just like, how does this happen?
So what is an appraisal? For so many, the system is a black box. So what is it, and what's the reason you need one?
Number one, it is an opinion of value by definition, which means that people's opinions can differ. The way we as appraisers make our case is by taking a look at comparable sales that have sold recently and nearby, and then using that information, we say, well, if this house, which is just like your house, sold for X number of dollars, then it would stand to reason that your house would be worth approximately the same amount. It's a blend of art and science. Now, in the case of a purchase transaction where you have a buyer and a seller who have this agreed upon price that's outlined in the contract, if that appraised value comes in even $1 lower, if they don't have that additional dollar to bring to the closing table, they miss out on the opportunity to purchase that home.
One of the leading reasons for mortgage denials for African Americans and Latinos is lack of collateral. Well, what does lack of collateral mean? In most cases, it means the property didn't appraise out. If your appraisal doesn't appraise out, you don't get the loan.
Our lowballed investigation found in refinance transactions, appraisers were 10 to 30 times more likely to undervalue homes in America's poorest black neighborhoods than in the wealthiest white neighborhoods. And it's happening more often. It's leading to more black and Latino families to draw a page from a similar playbook of whitewashing their homes.
The Austins immediately called their lender and pushed back. After a month of escalating their complaints, they were approved for a second appraisal. When the date came, they got creative.
We had a conversation with one of our white friends, and she is like, no problem, I'll be Tanisha. I'll bring over some pictures of my family.
The suspicion was clearly that the house was being devalued because of the homeowner's race. And so, I understood that I was standing in to be a white homeowner to see if that had any impact on the appraisal value. And so the house had to look like it was actually my house. And maybe some of your home furnishings don't look like they'd be in my house. So, the appraiser showed up at the door, and I assumed that I was Tanisha, and she looked, and every once in a while she would ask a question, and I would text Tanisha, like, are the countertops quartz, or what material is that? I was trying to answer the questions as if I lived here.
The Austins' experiment of whitewashing their home worked. With Jan sitting in, a new appraiser selected more valuable homes as comparable properties to the Austins.
So it appraised for 1.482, 50% more than what it appraised for by a couple weeks prior.
Almost 1.5, $500,000 more.
We knew that the appraisal wasn't what it should have been, but that magnitude of difference.
She quantified it immediately because she's a math person. She was like, that's over 50%. Like, your house increased over 50% with me standing in for you 3 weeks later. To put it in that term was like, whoa. Thank God we have a friend who can come and be us or be me so that we can get the value of our home that we should.
There was no victory or like celebration over that number. You know, as a white person, I might get a low appraisal that I disagree with, that I think used the wrong comps, but I'll never suspect that I got that low appraisal because of the color of my skin.
I'm so looking forward to this. You didn't think I was going to even be able to, I didn't think I was going to be able to handle it.
I feel like you're in a reality TV show.
I want to ask you about the erasure that you all had to perform in taking down your artwork, your family photos. Even though at the end of the day, it was mission accomplished because you got the higher appraised value.
It was humiliating, right? For somebody to have to change who they are, essentially, and be like, oh, well, we're gonna make sure that we take everything and put it in storage. I'm talking about we going through our kids' rooms, taking stuff down. My wife went through her bathroom, get rid of her hair products, all of our books and our art to make sure that we removed everything. And then we had to come back and put it all back in, right? Like we had to literally move back into our home with our belongings again.
It's hard to take down who you are because you're not sure if who you are is good enough. You should never have to think about that. It should never be a question like, is this the reason why? Because it's not the countertops, it's not the view, it's not the floors, it's not the fireplace, because 3 weeks later, those are all value more. So there was something else that made it less of a value.
What the lady saw was the color of our skin. What the lady saw was our home being here in Marin City. And so she comes in with her own lens and was like, well, this is what I feel their life is worth.
Why can't the house just be evaluated for the house? Why is it that the race, the people who are in the house make a difference about how much the house is valued at? So then that's when it goes back to, you're not just evaluating the house, you're evaluating me. You're saying that I'm worth a certain amount.
And yes, over this time, we've been able to process it and understand that it is a systemic issue, but it's still those questions of how dare they? Why are we being looked at as less than?
This is not about just Tanisha and Paul Austin versus the appraisal industry. This is about millions of people and generations of people who have been impacted by a system that was not fair.
For someone to lowball you, it is not the give and take. It's not a back and forth. It is, you're challenging my intelligence. When you watch movies, I will quote movies. Like, if I like a good movie, I will watch it.
What's your most quoted movie?
Lately, because of everything that I'm dealing with personally, professionally, just everything. Color Purple.
Oof. All my life I had to fight.
All my life I had to fight. I'm even putting it in emojis on every social media platform. You know, every weekend, this park is just filled with people, filled with families.
And you have prime access to that from your home.
Yeah. Right on the other side of this, there's a huge tech development called 16 Tech. So it's kind of like a hub for tech startups.
So you have a tech startup, you have a major university right here, research, medical university.
Yeah, major hospitals.
10 minutes from downtown.
Not even 10 minutes, because I get to work in about 7. Look.
That might be because of speeding, but still so close to the heart of everything.
Yes.
I got what you want, I got what you want, I got what you want.
Tell us a little bit about the historic nature of this neighborhood and the Flander House homes.
When this neighborhood was created, those in government at that time said it wouldn't last 50 years. And here we are 70 plus years strong. 185 families that built these homes. And they have pride in that history of living in a place that is so rich, despite all of the barriers that were put in place for it, despite the fact that it was a throwaway idea to say, oh, just give them the land over by the dump. And they turned it into a diamond. And now folks want to take the diamond away.
For Carlette Duffy, that diamond is this home she purchased to be closer to family.
Julian? Yes, so good to finally meet you.
From the day Carlette moved in, she had a big plan to one day purchase her grandmother's house just a few doors down from her.
I just adore this picture. So this is my mom, and this is the family house.
A house where she spent so much of her childhood.
Isn't she gorgeous?
She is adorable.
My baby.
With the goal of one day passing it on to her child.
My sister had an appraisal done on her home, and that appraisal came back at 198.
It's important to know that Carlette's sister Tempe lives next door to her, literally the next home over.
If I could get my home appraised close to that, I would be able to pull the equity out to then do a cash purchase of my grandmother's home. And so if hers came in at 189, then I would think mine should come in very close to that. But it came in at 125, which was surprising to me. What he valued my home at was not going to allow me to do what I needed to do.
At that point, the loan was dead. Carlette was unable to prove she had enough equity in her home to take out the cash to purchase her grandmother's property.
I said, I'm ready to fight. Whatever it takes to fight. Let's do it, because this cannot continue. Cannot.
This time, she took a page from a now familiar playbook.
I went through the work of whitewashing my home. What in my house is a black person lives here. Removing everything that represented me, my family, my culture, everything. I have my Asian-inspired pieces that replaced my African-inspired pieces. I met with some of my girlfriends, one's black, one's white, both married to white men. And I was like, can I borrow one of y'all's husbands? My friend Brooke, her husband Hank was like, of course I'll do it. I told him, I said, I just need you to be my brother.
You think it's an algorithm that's not based on anything, but then, you know, you go through something like this and you realize like how much subjectivity there must be there.
In a couple of days, I got the appraisal report back.
And what was that about?
$259. $259.
That's more than double the original appraised amount of Carlette's home.
It just hits me, just in that short amount of time, that I was right. And that it was me. The only thing bringing down the value of my home was me. That this is a system that's telling me that I devalue my home. That when there is a white male here to speak on behalf of what they believe is a white female, it's better than having me here. And that's what hurts. It's like, what is so terrible about me that it takes value?
I was really sad when, you know, she echoed the sentiment of, am I what's wrong with my house? Like, I don't ever have to feel like that, like ever.
White privilege, if you need an example, because many of our people do need an example of white privilege, and you being here just is, I mean, you didn't have to do anything but literally be here as a white person.
Carlette Duffy did what so many fair housing groups across the country do in conducting what's called a fair housing test. She just did it for herself. And out of that, you know, her story went viral. And so many people then started contacting us from across the country about their own experiences. And since that time, we've had a number of other individuals contact us, and we have a number of investigations that are pending. The bias and discrimination is so baked into our housing process, we haven't been able to properly address it. So I think for a lot of people, they felt that if they spoke up, their voices simply wouldn't be heard. They wouldn't be believed, or anything would be done about it either.
And one of my favorite lines that is related to all of this, "Oh brother, where art thou?" I love that movie. You ain't no kind of man if you don't own land. That is real.
The appraisal industry is an older workforce. It is predominantly white male. You already know, these are people who were raised, they were trained in the field to say that race matters. Communities of color are devalued. That's how they were trained professionally. And these are the same appraisers who are making decisions today. So they're bringing all of those biases with them when they are making their decisions. Even if it's subjective, right? Even if it's not conscious, those biases are still coming with them. The appraisal industry is not diverse at all. In fact, it's very homogenous. It's overwhelmingly white male. One analysis showed that when it comes to the appraisal industry, 96% are white and just 4% are people of color. That's a huge disparity. It looks nothing like what America is.
Those statistics are mind-blowing. So what's being done to make the industry more diverse? That's just one of the big questions Jody Bishop and the Appraisal Institute are trying to answer. Bishop's group is the largest professional appraisal organization in the country with more than 16,000 members who have more in common than just their profession.
The appraisal profession should mirror the faces of the communities we work in. And certainly there's a lot of work in the area of diversity that we have started years ago, and we are continuing now with our efforts. And we can always get better, and we should never stop trying to diversify the profession.
We found out that appraisers definitely are not shy when it comes to sharing their views about the race of the folks that live in the neighborhoods that they're appraising.
We're talking about comments appraisers made in private Facebook groups with thousands of members each. One of the members shared screenshots with us.
So these groups date back many years. I'm looking at a comment right here from 2016. It says, "Whose brilliant idea was it to schedule 6 inspections in South Atlanta in the ghetto on Saturday morning? Whoever it was, they need to be fired." This one says, "Don't make eye contact with the natives, and I hope you're wearing the right colors," whatever that means. Another guy writes under that comment, says, "Dang man, I usually make sure I do my hood inspections before 11 a.m. The boy's still sleeping, so I don't need to put a cap in their blank." Another guy writes, "I can see it now. Breaking news. Shooting in the ghetto. Appraiser praised by neighbors for getting rid of 6 drug gang members hiding out in the empty house he went to appraise." And then that guy follows up with another comment because he had to beat the one he just commented before that. It says, "Wear a priest garb with a collar. Usually works except in the ISIS areas. Oops."
There's also plenty of talk about bias, the word used 115 times in the screenshots that we received of those private Facebook groups. They even mentioned my own reporting. One appraiser writes, "I'm not suggesting this, but if ABC7 and Julian Glover keep coming up with unsupported allegations, the black community in America is very likely to face some form of shadow boycotting." And maybe this is the result of my reporting. Another appraiser writes, "One general appraiser I know has already started to decline appraisal assignments for purchase and refinances if the seller or borrower or agent is a different race than he is." Let that sink in.
Again, these are people who are supposed to be coming into your neighborhood, literally into your home, and you expect them to give you a fair shake at an appraisal, an unbiased opinion. But how could their opinion be unbiased if they're saying things like this in these appraiser Facebook groups?
It's one thing to say that this is a certain characteristic of the neighborhood, but to take that characteristic and penalize it possibly would be not the right thing to have happen.
It's really hard for me to believe that that person can fully remove themselves from this bias, that they're willing to openly espouse in a Facebook group with their picture, their name, and then go do things by the books.
You know, if somebody's doing anything like that because of a personal characteristic, they are absolutely intentionally saying, this isn't good, I'm going to do this. That's totally unacceptable. If there's an appraiser out there that absolutely says, I'm not going to go appraise in this neighborhood because it's populated by people of color, then that's a form of discrimination. Pure and simple. I mean, it is. It's biased, it's discriminatory. Now, we have a right to do what we want to do as business people, and we could define areas we want to appraise in and not appraise in, right? But it shouldn't be driven by the fact that it's, let's say, a neighborhood of color and a neighborhood of no color. I'll go there, I won't go here.
Wow, you can give that a round of applause. It is now my pleasure to bring up an esteemed group, all of the people that were featured in the film. I'm going to introduce, first I'm going to introduce Lisa Rice, as you met earlier, President and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance. Joan Trice, founder of Collateral Risk Network. Jillian Rice, appraisal consultant. And last but not least, anchor and reporter of ABC 7 News, Julian Glover. Now, Julian, you're a director now. You're not a reporter. Don't ask me any questions, right? I'm asking the questions.
I'll try not to.
You know, now, reporters often do follow-up stories to get greater context, more details. But a documentary is a big follow-up. What inspired you to do a documentary on this topic, and what have you learned what had surprised you in the process of doing it?
Well, first, I think the personal stories that you heard in the documentary, Our America Lowballed, and I want to encourage everyone to stream the documentary in its entirety on Hulu and also at lowballed.abc for free for those who don't have Hulu. But when you hear a story like the Austins, when you hear a story like Carlette Duffy in Indianapolis, when you hear a story like the Curtis family in Oakland, it kept me up at night. How could you not want to get to the root of what is causing these inequities that we're blatantly seeing on display here? So that is certainly one of the things that, led me to continue to keep going. And those three folks, that's just a fraction of the stories that I was able to tell in my local reporting at ABC 7 News in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that's just an even smaller fraction of the families that have reached out to me from all across the country, practically standing in line to say, me too. This has also happened to me too. What can we do about it? So that's what's inspired me to continue that storytelling. And we're not done with Our America Lowballed. We're continuing our investigation. I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much here. But as Secretary Fudge announced today, freeing up funds so fair housing advocacy groups across the country can do appraisal testing. We've completed a round of appraisal testing, and we expect to publish those findings in some follow-up reporting. As far as the things that I've learned, the first thing goes back to those families. It is an incredible amount of emotional labor that is, quite frankly, dehumanizing for someone to have to remove their artwork, their family photos, their hair products, just to hide who they are, just so they can get the best possible shake at what we know is a huge contributor when it comes to intergenerational wealth, the appraised value of your home. The second thing I would say is that there is clearly, as evidenced by my reporting
the incredible work that you have done, likewise, Lisa Rice as well, is that there is clearly some subjectivity, too much subjectivity when it comes to the appraisal process. If we remove the idea of racial discrimination for even just a second, how is it that an opinion of value can be so subjective and both of them accepted that you can have a $500,000 discrepancy between those two opinions? It's mind-blowing. The third thing I would say is that there clearly needs to be more oversight. As those who have seen the full documentary, you've heard the Curtis family story. They did everything right. They fought this thing tooth and nail. These are two folks who work in the real estate industry, so they knew how to do a proper rebuttal. They knew to ask for that reconsideration of value, and it was denied to them. Moreover, after they went through the incredible lengths of filing at the federal level with HUD and also with the state of California, and they had to wait a year for that state review to be completed, once the review came out, they had to file a FOIA request to get the results. There was never any follow-up to know what happened with that appraiser. What did the state find? And what the state found is that that appraiser fabricated evidence, fabricated the comparable properties, didn't do the due diligence of driving the comps. They were fined $2,000 and have to undergo, I believe, something like 40 or 45 hours of continuing education. But even before they complete that education, they still can appraise homes.
And that's not accountability at all,
No,
right?
I think most people can agree on that.
And I want to get to this issue of accountability. Joan, you are in the appraisal industry. Why is it so difficult to hold appraisers and appraisal firms accountable?
Are we going to put up?
Yeah, and I think we got a slide that will illustrate the governance structure, if you want to call that, in the appraisal industry. So, folks in the back.
I don't really need to explain anything. That says it for me.
Is that the spaghetti chart?
Yep, that's my famous spaghetti chart, which I did present before Congress in the House Financial Services Committee hearing in 2016. And it makes no sense. And I've been accused of being perhaps inebriated when I drew this. I would respectfully submit that the congressman who designed our structure might have been, because that explains everything. Even those within the industry who are within the know can't figure out who to go to and complain when there is an issue. And certainly a homeowner and a consumer would drive themselves insane trying to navigate that. It's just not possible.
But just in general, just can you narrate a little bit of how folks, the accountability structure, because there are just many different agencies, both state and federal, and there just doesn't seem to be a direct line to anyone, any sector.
Yeah, so we became regulated in 1989 with the advent of FIREA, the Financial Institute Reform and Recovery Act. Did I get that one right? And that began the licensing process. So because of states' rights, we transferred an awful lot of power to the states to initiate the licensing process and then also oversee appraisers. And of course, the problem with that is it takes a very long time. It has gotten better over time, but it's still woefully, it's not a solution. If you have a transaction pending, if you're in the middle of a real estate deal and you're having, the appraisal came in low and you think there might be a fair housing violation, to appeal it to a state, as Sean pointed out, that can take a year. I mean, what if that was the house of your dreams? It's now long gone. And so what needs to be done, in my personal opinion, is we need to consolidate. I know DC gets very excited when you say we need a new regulator. I'm suggesting, no, we need to get rid of all of those and consolidate into one, and then we will have an authority to go to file a complaint. Because right now, it's basically a circular firing squad.
Now, I'm going to get back to a question to you and Jillian on that about Maxine Waters' legislation, but I want to get to Jillian at somewhat of a follow-up. There's been a lot of external pressure from because of lawsuits, because of media, because of researchers on the appraisal industry. As an appraiser and someone who is intricately linked to one of the major appraisal governance structures, how are appraisers responding to this new scrutiny? Are they open to change? And what specifically are they doing to move to prevent some of the stories that are in this documentary?
If I had to summarize the response of appraisers to this in one word, it would be defensiveness. No, this isn't happening. It's completely unfounded. It's based on anecdotes. And in the beginning of this conversation, the alarm was sound by people sharing their stories of bias, such as the ones that we saw here. I have my own story of bias with an appraising and having my parents' property lowballed and having to advocate for
And your
them.
parents are here, by the way. Always give their parents a round of applause.
So the overall feeling has been defensiveness. No, this isn't happening. Now what has been helpful is that each of the GSEs, the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie and Freddie, have come out with their reporting, and now the conversation is shifting a little bit towards, okay, we have numbers and data around this. It's becoming harder to say, no, few bad apples, not systematic, when you're looking at millions of appraisal reports in addition now to the anecdotes, which I think really bring it to life. And so internally, as an industry, really have to take a look at ourselves, and I think beginning with the demographics. A lot of people don't know any appraisers, so within my group of friends, a lot of them thought I was representative. And I had to tell them, oh, no, big time anomaly within the industry. And so taking a look at why is it so lacking in diversity, and what does it take to become an appraiser, and how is that a gating item in terms of new appraisers entering into the industry? Because if you're attaching opinions of value to communities that you perhaps have negative opinions of, then those communities never have the opportunity to get a fair chance.
Now, I'm just going to just quickly ask you about Maxine Waters' legislation. Do you support a federal agency that will regulate appraisers?
I support anything that increases the level of accountability for the appraisers. Again, going back to the spaghetti chart, everything is kind of spread out everywhere. And having worked at a lender, I remember feeling a great deal of frustration with the lack of accountability. There is a certain extent of tiptoeing around appraisers because they are independent contractors. You want them to go into certain territories and neighborhoods, especially when mortgage volume is high, and you want the turn times to remain within a reasonable amount. So there have been instances where there is something that you want to go and say, oh, can you take another look at this? Or a complaint from a homeowner. And the delicacy of how to approach the appraisers, and also the inability to really take definitive action in the event that you do think that something was handled incorrectly, I think has been a frustration across the board. So having accountability, but also empowering the appraisers with information so that you're not just saying, hey, this report was biased, but also telling them it was biased, here is why, here is the data to help you rectify that in the future.
And Joan, you answered that question a little bit, but can you just reiterate, would you support Maxine Waters' legislation that would create a federal agency that would provide oversight?
That's precisely what I'm supporting. We need one-stop shop, somebody to be held accountable.
Now, Lisa, a lot has happened since the subjects have been filmed. particularly with the Federal Housing Finance Agency releasing data, changes in test scores. What are you seeing overall that gives you hope that we will end or curb the discrimination for appraisal bias?
Yeah, thanks so much, Andre. That's a great question. A lot has happened, quite frankly. And I think when you participated and testified before the Congress, you and I both were quite frustrated because it seemed like, okay, this is going to be more of doing nothing. But then Julian started breaking stories about families across the nation who were experiencing this challenge. And I think the story about the Austin Tate family was just so ostentatious. Like, people were like, excuse me, $500,000 of difference in value. It went viral, and then the stories just kept going viral. And that, I think, started really creating this momentum to get the ball moving. The appraisal subcommittee, after that reporting, issued an RFP for...
Can you explain the appraisal subcommittee?
The appraisal subcommittee was one of those agencies that was on Jones' spaghetti chart. It is a federal agency. It is a part of FIREA. But it is a federal agency that has oversight over the appraisal industry, but in a very limited, restricted fashion. And it is, I would call it a toothless tiger. The agency really does need more teeth and more power. And it needs to be elevated, and it needs all of those things you saw on Jones' chart sort of consolidated under that one agency. But it is a federal agency. So they issued the RFP for a really in-depth analysis of the appraisal industry and appraisal bias issues. We were the successful winner of that RFP process. And then you heard me explain that Maureen Yap led the work of our team to do that. And I have to say, I mean, I've been working on appraisal bias cases for about 40 years. My staff earlier today made me feel so old, y'all, because they didn't know two major songs by Aretha Franklin, who is Riri. She is the Riri. I don't care what Rihanna says. And by Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder's Cash in Your Face, and Aretha Franklin's You Lied, right? Don't play that song for me. My staff was like, no, we never heard those songs. Sorry. So yeah, I feel old today. I've been doing appraisal bias cases for 40 years. And I was surprised, I was literally shocked at what the team found when we did this groundbreaking analysis. Just the governance structure alone, I couldn't believe it. It was incredulous to me. But also the training and the inefficiency, the deficiencies in the training that appraisers get. That's why we need a stronger federal agency to dictate those standards so that appraisers do get well trained. You heard me say in the documentary that up until the 1970s, in the leading appraisal treatises, the appraisal manuals that were used to train appraisers, it taught appraisers that you have to take race into consideration, right? So there is a lot that has developed since this groundbreaking reporting, and of course more needs to happen. I tell people and point out to people all the time, remember that in this nation we have passed literally thousands of race-based inequitable policies. They were race-conscious inequitable policies for hundreds of years. We're not going to fix that overnight. It is going to take all of us, industry, government, advocates, researchers. It is going to take all of us working together and rowing in the same direction to fix what we've essentially done to ourselves, right, for 400 years.
Now, we're going to move in a little bit to questions from the audience. And if you're watching online, you could submit your questions to events, that's plural, events, at brookings.edu, or you can text or tweet your question to @Brookings Metro using the hashtag appraisal bias. I just want to follow up with you, Julian, around the Austins and Colette Duffy. What's happening with their cases right now?
So with the Austin family's case, there we go. With the Austin family's case, almost there. We're going to switch out. Hot mic, all right. With the Austin family's case, as you know, they have filed a federal lawsuit against the appraiser and appraisal management company in question. We should also point out the Department of Justice filed a statement of interest on behalf of the Austins, saying essentially that there is some there for their case to move forward. As far as the lawsuit against the appraisal management company, that has been settled. It was a closed settlement, so obviously the terms of that settlement are not publicly released. And we should also point out, as far as the lawsuit against the appraiser in question, that those settlement talks are ongoing. As far as Colette Duffy's case, she's still waiting. She is still waiting for her case to make its way through HUD. And, you know, I will say that has been the frustration from some of the folks that I've interviewed of saying, you know, why can't this move a little bit faster? Why can't this move more quickly? Because like Joan mentioned, there's a chilling effect that happens when you're denied that loan, right, because of the appraisal. And I think many of the families would wish that things could be unthawed, if you will, you know, just as quickly. So they're still waiting. And, you know, their stories are truly, you know, evident of so many families all across the country that are in this kind of holding pattern to see what happens.
Now, we have a senior official here of HUD and someone who's leading the charge on the Property Appraisal Valuation Equity Task Force, PAVE Task Force, the unique task force that the Biden administration put forth. I want to talk about it. And she may want to respond in a little bit, but what did PAVE get right? It issued a report. There were dozens of action items. What did it get right, in your opinion? I'll maybe go with the appraisers here.
One thing that I think PAVE got right was looking to standardize the reconsideration of value process. So when you have a low appraisal, borrowers, homeowners don't know what to do. A lot of times they don't even know that there is an option to go back and say, hey, I think this is incorrect. Can you please take another look? But what happens is that this process is managed individually by every single lender. And so there is no sharing of information, and therefore there's no ability to identify trends. Maybe lender A has had, you know, one bias claim from a particular appraiser, and all the other reports are seemingly fine. And then lender B has had one complaint about this appraiser, and so on and so forth. Individually, each of the lenders is going to think, okay, this doesn't cross the threshold for this appraiser to be removed from our panel. However, collectively, it could paint a much larger, broader, more accurate picture of what's going on with individual appraisers. So I think having a real focus on what the options are for homeowners when their appraisal comes in low. There being more education about what your recourse is, and then also the solidifying of that information so it can be shared will enable the industry to make more informed decisions.
Joan?
Well, following up on some of the things that you just said, it's actually even worse than what you think, in that I have a company separate from the Collateral Risk Network. We actually collect information on appraisers' credentials, and the background and the disciplinary actions brought against them are actually hidden. Over 70% of the complaints against appraisers cannot be found on the appraisal subcommittee registry. Most people don't know that. And in fact, there's instances, so even if a complaint is made and it's been fully adjudicated, I can give you examples all over the country One of the most heinous ones is a gentleman in Philadelphia murdered a 15-year-old black kid, shot him in the back because he was looting a home that he was renovating. The gentleman went to, I shouldn't use the word gentleman, should I? The man went to prison. His appraisal license was held on ice, and when he was released from prison, he was granted his appraisal license.
Wow.
So lenders don't even know that. And what regulator in their right mind? I mean, the job of the state regulator is to protect the public trust. It's shocking that that actually can happen in the United States of America.
What excites you about the PAVE report and some of the actionable items in it?
Well, we're excited about a lot in the PAVE report. It is extremely comprehensive. It addresses governance issues, the request for reconsideration issues. It addresses the licensing issues that Joan talked about. So it's very comprehensive. Now, it doesn't address every single thing that needs to be changed, because as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot, right, that needs to happen. So we're very excited about it, but the thing I think that excites us the most is, oftentimes you get these great action plans or strategy plans, and then they just sit on the shelf, right? There's no implementation. And here we have implementation. You heard Secretary Fudge mention how committed she and Ambassador Rice are to implementing every single one of those measures. And then the other thing they've been doing is trying to get the industry and other stakeholders to support all of the strategies identified in the PAVE action plan, and it is going to take all of us to implement those things. Now, there are a couple of things, some things that are not included. So one is sort of making sure that the appraisal form is revamped and restructured, the appraisal process, because right now we rely on what is called a sales comparison approach, and you heard people talking about that in the documentary. That sales comparison approach allows for a lot of discretion. The appraiser can choose which neighborhoods they want to draw comparables from. They can choose which comparables they want to use. The appraisers can choose how they want to make adjustments on those comparables. It's very discretionary. And so that whole process needs to be revamped so that it is more science and less art.
Now, we're going to turn to audience questions in about 5 minutes. I'm just going to ask a few more questions. I want to stick on this issue around the race of the appraiser. One of the challenges that I've had is that I've held that even if you diversify the workforce, if they're using the same practices, you'll get similar results. With that said, all value is socially constructed. Our backgrounds, our perceptions manifest themselves in how we value things. Where do you see the race of the appraiser falling into this issue? It's certainly a workforce issue, but how do you see that playing out in the lower valuation of homes in black neighborhoods? And anybody can take that.
Take that. So I think when we talk about appraisal bias, there are actually two issues that are being conflated into one. So one, there are the individual biases of this very homogenous group of appraisers who are going out and assigning opinions to communities that they are not a part of. But then the other element of it is the aftermath of redlining. So the values of black and brown communities have been suppressed over the years. And so even if you have the most unbiased appraiser in the history of appraising, still the underlying value of the property itself has been diminished. So kind of teasing apart the two of them, diversifying the appraisal industry and having the race of the appraiser more closely match up with the race of the communities that are being served will solve for part of it and a piece of it, but certainly not the whole.
Now, in the last few minutes before we take audience questions, I want you to tell Julian what you learned by watching the documentary. What did you take in as just a consumer of the film? And,
Asking the questions for me, I like it.
yeah, that's right. You are not the reporter. You're a director.
Well, for me, it made it incredibly personal. I mean, as an appraiser, we're dealing with forms and hectic schedules and hurry up, get the report done. But at the end of the day, these are human lives, and we're impacting those. And I'm not sure. I think appraisers need even just a little sensitivity training as to the process. We're just disregarding this racial issue. You're in their castle, and they're not often respectful of that.
I was very well acquainted with the personal costs of it. I think for me, there's a greater sense of urgency. Just seeing other stories and all of them compiled and the prevalence of it, again, I knew that I was prevalent. I've had conversations with family and friends who have experienced this as well, but seeing other stories in other areas and now being at a point in time in my own career where I can actually do something about it, it really made it very clear that this should be a focus, because when I get a text message from a family member or a friend who says, the appraiser's coming, what should I do? I'm not satisfied with the answers that I'm giving them currently. So for me, more urgency.
Power of the media. I don't think it can be understated. I mean, just look at the impact of one very diligent reporter seeking the truth and uncovering this whole world and exposing that to the public and basically saying, here it is, take it and run with it. And I think you have seen how everyone all the way down the line has taken this reporting, this information, this data, and ran with it.
You know, and I'll just add before we go to audience questions that when I watched the film, it reinforced in my mind that we have many more laws on the books to go after people who commit acts of individual discrimination, a person against another. But we don't have a lot of laws on the books around discrimination for entire neighborhoods, place-based discrimination, and both those things were prevalent in your documentary. We just don't have those tools, and both are at play. You don't necessarily have to have a white hood or burning crosses. You can go after a place to have the same effect at a scale that's different. So that's what I've learned. Oh, you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add on that. I mean, I know I only had 30 minutes to really condense down what is a 75-minute documentary, so we're picking and choosing what we get in there, and I wanted to end it strategically so on those comments left by appraisers in these closed Facebook groups. I mean, again, when you talk about just the malicious intent that is clearly being espoused by these appraisers that then go and conduct this job that clearly we all now know is so important to how we build wealth in this country, how we pass down intergenerational wealth from grandparents to parents, from parents to children. It's just so crucial that we do look at exactly what you said. How do we get at the bigger picture of these policies, these racist policies and laws that have impacted communities for generations since the inception of this country? And as you talk about the diligent reporter, Lisa, who uncovered all of this, I would be remiss without thanking all of you sitting on this panel for educating me on this topic. As I said at the top of the documentary, I am no expert in the home appraisal process or housing in general. You know, housing reporting wasn't my beat, but all of you and so many others have been so gracious in giving me the knowledge to be able to report on this issue in the most in-depth and educated way possible. So thank you.
Now it's time for you to ask the questions. Oh, we got a question. I'm going to give the mic to my esteemed colleague, Tracy Lowe, in the back. She has her hand raised. Please.
This is a great event. Thank
Please
you so
introduce
much.
yourself.
Hi, my name's Tracy Lowe. I'm a fellow at the Brookings Institution. I want to ask this panel about automated valuation methods, which maybe folks have become familiar with being able to look up your own house on Redfin or Zillow and to see a dollar figure suggesting what your house might be worth. So for example, the Zestimate on Zillow. Do automated valuation methods have anything to offer either research or regulation in terms of attempts to understand the exact mechanism by which appraisal bias happens and to end it?
Well, the one, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, so there's more than that too, right? There's desktop underwriting and things like that. There are algorithmic-based tools that businesses are using to try and perform appraisals and give property valuations. And the thing that I point out is what Jillian and Joan alluded to earlier, that we have this sort of underlying sort of systemic these systemic challenges and structural challenges that then perpetuate discriminatory outcomes. The Urban Institute actually did a study, an analysis on automated property valuation models and found, yeah, they still contain bias. And we did some work with the Urban Institute on that project. So I just want to point out to people that technology is not a panacea. It is not the end-all be-all. Algorithmic models still perpetuate bias and in fact can sometimes amplify bias and can perpetuate bias quicker than an individual appraiser can.
Now we have a few questions that were already submitted. Amy Barnes of Sacramento asked what local city governments can do to rectify the ongoing impact of redlining and racialized housing practices. What can city governments do?
Well, one thing city governments can do is abide by the affirmatively furthering fair housing provision of the Fair Housing Act, which they have been required to do since 1968. We're 55 years out from when that law was passed, and we still do not have wide-scale, broad adoption and implementation of the affirmatively furthering fair housing provision of the law. And in fact, some jurisdictions fight against abiding by that provision. So that's the first thing they can do.
Anyone else?
I would also just commend actually the state of California for passing a law that now requires appraisers to go through additional anti-bias training. I'm by no means going to say that anti-bias training is going to save us, is going to be the end-all be-all, but it's a nice first step. That there needs to be greater education about fair housing laws in this country. And something else that I have just seen and learned from the number of screenings of Our America Lowballed that we've been able to do, primarily in the Bay Area, but we are just so undereducated as a country about the previous harm that has been done by the federal government, by state governments on people of color. So many people walk up to me after a screening and say, I didn't know what redlining was. I'd never heard of it until the film. That's a problem. And in a lot of these instances, these are people who are in power. These are decision makers. These are really educated people that have no clue about this. So I think education is certainly a great first step.
Please raise your hand and we'll find you. I'm going to read the next question as they find the next person in the house. Lisa Evans of the National Institutes of Health says, I am an African-American female. This has happened to me in Silver Springs. Maryland, before the appraisal, I researched comps in my area and knew that the first appraisal came in 100K less than it should have. A second appraisal that I paid for confirmed my suspicion. What assistance or resources are available to individuals who do not have the resources that I did? I mean, that's an important point. A lot of people don't have white friends that'll stand in for them. You know, what do people do if they don't agree with the appraisal they received, and what are the chances of them getting a reconsideration?
Again, I think just being educated in terms of what the options are. So in that case, this person was able to get a second appraisal. However, I think the first path should be the reconsideration of value, and then also understanding how to put together a successful rebuttal. When I was working at a bank, I did some analysis to see, okay, when we get a reconsideration of value, how often do they result in a change in value? 80% of the time, they did not result in a change in value. And then the remaining 20% of the time where the value did change, it only changed by $5,000. And so a lot of that is just a lack of education in terms of how to speak to the appraiser and speak in terms of comparables. A lot of the reconsiderations, homeowners focus on things like the appliances or the windows or the floors, not items that are in the sales comparison grid, and that's actually going to move the needle. And so in seeing that there is a gap in this, I've started putting together a guide for homeowners specifically to be able to create successful reconsiderations of value. And so Julian was kind enough to include that on the Lowballed website, and it's under step-by-step guide. So I think education could be one of the very first steps in case you don't have, a daughter who happens to be an appraiser and can write your reconsideration.
People can also file. People can also file a complaint. I'm red. People can also file a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development or with the CFPB and with their local fair housing organization.
And I just want to add, we have all of that information laid out on our website for the documentary, lowballed.abc, and go to the About page. And we have included so much of the information that Jillian has so graciously shared with us, these step-by-step guides. We have the links to file with HUD, also for your respective states as well. Again, lowballed.abc, go to the About page, and we have all of that information laid out there because it's confusing. It's a daunting process, but we can help guide you through it, and that's what we do on the website.
We have a question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Boyd Campbell. I am a realtor celebrating my 47th year in the business, broker, Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, and thank you for this forum. A couple of notes I wanted to say. Thank you for attacking this problem with truth and science. Many of my colleagues, both appraisers, realtors, and lenders, are in denial about this. It's a nothing burger. There's no truth to this, and if it is, it's a one-off, as some of you have mentioned. I will say that particularly lenders are complicit with this. Oftentimes, they're the front lines when an appraisal comes in lower. I know you mentioned the GSEs, and certainly they play a role, but I think on the ground is something more immediate, is to make sure that lenders are part of this conversation and they come up with solutions to help with this phenomenon that's been going on almost 50 years that I've been practicing real estate full-time. And lastly, I'll mention, and I don't know there's a fix for this, but many would make a compelling argument that there are certainly unintended consequences as you attack this issue, and that is the increase of prices that are out of reach by many at-risk communities, and also increased assessed values for tax purposes. So some would argue, gee, you know what, be careful what you ask for. It's bigger than that. There are all these residual advantages and some would argue disadvantages when you attack this issue, but I think we have to just start to pay the freight and tackle this issue and make it fair for my grandchildren. Thank you.
Yeah, he raises a great point. You just can't wave a magic wand and say, let's raise housing prices. You would hurt the people in those communities. So what are we really talking about here about correcting this problem?
Yeah, so let me point out that at least for Black communities, now I have not done an in-depth analysis for Latino communities, but for black communities are already over-assessed. So an appraiser might appraise your value at $125, but you're being taxed at a value of $200,000. So in most major cities in particular, people who live in predominantly black communities pay a higher rate for their tax assessment than do people who live in predominantly white communities.
Anyone else want to tackle that question around the fixes in ways that do not harm the residents there?
Well, this is really an appraisal process thing that I would like to comment on. And I think, there's been discussion all day long about the art and the science, as Jillian mentioned several times. It is, at the end of the day, an opinion, and that's why it's so hard to battle, because my opinion is, and it's completely subjective. So I think there's parts of the appraisal process that, as we consider modernization, that we should look at. And in speaking to Lisa knows Peter Christensen well, and Peter's seen a lot of the appraisals that are in question with these that have been on the video or the documentary. I think we came to the conclusion that we think the area most vulnerable in an appraisal to subjectivity is in the condition. Because today we used to have good, fair, poor. Today we have 1 through 6. Everybody still ends up at the middle. It's still a subjective rating. I think it would be very simple to change the inspection process to making that more fact-based. And you can do that by literally saying, okay, the age of the roof is X. The kitchen was last remodeled in this year. The bathrooms were updated. The mechanicals, the age of the mechanicals. That can all be mathematically calculated, and that score ends up being fed to the appraiser, not determined by the appraiser, so that it's mathematically independent. And there are actuaries who do this all day long. I live in Florida, and I can tell you insurance companies know exactly what day and minute my roof is going to be worthless.
Yeah, right. And I want to be clear. I asked that question, but I also know that appraising is not the only factor that contributes to home values. And if we also need to pay attention to strengthening markets, and I like the work that is going on in terms of changing credit scoring, these special purpose mortgage initiatives. And I really do believe if we get capital into people's hand, restoring the value that's been extracted by racism, then people can participate in stronger markets. The goal is never to weaken the market, but to empower people so they can participate in it, removing these, drags of racism that are preventing people from getting in them, right? We have time for one more question. I think we're going to go right over here in the aisle.
Hello, I'm Tanisha Richardson from Freddie Mac, and I'm actually, I was going to ask the question about the tax assessment because my grandmother personally had a $250,000 difference between her appraisal, which was done in 2020 with a refi, and her assessment that was done the following year. So that is extremely important, and I would love additional research for those who do research, for them to do research on that gap, because that's a real big value loss there. My question is...
It is prevalent in every black neighborhood.
Yes. And, but my question is about appraiser diversity. And we're seeing changes in the market now. The market is, Some are saying stabilizing or declining, whatever you would call it. Appraisers are now trying to get into the industry, right? We have appraiser diversity initiatives that we're working on, getting appraisers ready to get into the market, but we see a decline in their access to the market. So does anyone have any thoughts about how we can remediate that?
I can take that one. That is a challenge. You're trying to get people in at a time where the number of applications are going down and there's less work across the board. But also let us be reminded that appraising extends beyond mortgage lending appraisals. There's tax certiorari work, divorce work, estate work, lots of different iterations of the appraisal industry. And so while most appraisers are predominantly in mortgage lending, in order to help bridge this gap, kind of introducing new appraisers and diverse appraisers to all aspects of appraising and all of the avenues. Therefore, when something like mortgage lending goes down, something else picks up and they're able to sustain and maintain themselves as they're going through their initial process to become licensed or certified.
Wow, that was a great panel. Please give these people a warm round of applause. Jillian White, Joan Trice, Lisa Rice, and of course, Julian Glover, anchor and reporter of ABC 7 News. Now we have one more special guest. Maybe if, you want to stay put, or do you want to walk off? You can walk off stage. We have one more special guest. You know, so much of this work is about giving consumers protection. So we wanted to make sure that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau had a say on this issue. And that's why we invited Zixa Martinez, who will provide some closing remarks to take us home, so to speak. Pun intended. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Andre. Thank you, NAFA and the Brookings Institution for continuing to keep the spotlight on appraisal bias. I'm pleased and humbled to be with you today because the magnitude and deep significance of the impact of appraisal bias on African Americans and Latinos and others is not lost on me or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The powerful storytelling captured through Lowballed and the discussion it has fostered are an important part of educating the public about the issue and bringing together the relevant policymakers, nonprofit organizations, industry, journalists, academics, and families. Among the many salient points, the documentary crystallizes how dehumanizing appraisal bias can be and lifts up the voices of those families harmed by the current appraisal system. The documentary and panel discuss the rather age-old and common practice of whitewashing, in which, for example, a Black or Latino family erases all evidence of their racial or ethnic background and relies on a white ally to pose as the homeowner to interact with the appraiser. That shouldn't make a difference, and yet it does. It can make a significant difference, life-changing difference, generational changing difference. During the panel discussion, we heard of the many systemic challenges that drive appraisal bias, as well as the possible solutions to overhaul the appraisal process to address discrimination and inequities. This challenge requires a whole of government response. As such, it is a priority for the CFPB as we continue to fulfill our mission to ensure fair, equitable, and non-discriminatory access to credit for individuals and communities, including African American and Latino families and neighborhoods. We know that owning a home is a key building block to generating intergenerational wealth, especially within communities that have been historically shut out from fair access to the housing market. Ensuring that the appraisals used to make lending decisions are accurate and free from bias is essential if families of all races and income levels are to prosper and successfully pursue the American dream of homeownership. That dream can quickly become a nightmare when families are forced into accepting valuations of their homes far below their true values. And there's a domino effect when a home is undervalued. The household suffers a significant loss in net worth and home equity, has fewer options in securing financing and favorable mortgage rates, and risks loss of collateral in the home. The homes in the surrounding community can be lowered in value when a realtor uses neighborhood comps to place an asking price on a home. As we heard HUD Secretary Fudge point out, the community suffers with a lower property tax base that is available to invest in schools and other basic civic necessities that inure to the benefit of not just the community, but the whole of society and our nation. These impacts can serve to reinforce historic redlining that has already depressed home values in the area. And as we heard today, the impacts aren't just economic. For a homeowner to have to erase themselves, pieces of their own identity, down to the hair products in their home, in order to get a fair appraisal, that is a humiliation no one should ever have to suffer. The CFPB is working with our partners on the FFIEC's appraisal subcommittee, which since March of 2022 I chair. CFPB also continues our work as a member of the White House Interagency Task Force on PAVE. As you heard, last year the task force released its action plan, and the CFPB is taking an active leadership role in ensuring the action items are implemented. In addition, Congress has assigned important responsibilities to the Appraisal Subcommittee, and we must live up to them. They include scrutinizing the work of the Appraisal Foundation, which as the primary organization that sets the standards for appraisals and qualification criteria for appraisers, wields enormous power in the appraisal industry. The CFPB has taken action since the PAVE report was released. We have engaged with the Appraisal Foundation on many issues, including the failure to provide clear warnings about the requirements of federal law in the standards it sets and in the training it provides for appraisers. Given the stubborn persistence of appraisal bias, CFPB is considering all available avenues to tackle discrimination in appraisals, including technologies which could potentially reduce or mitigate bias. We are working alongside with our interagency partners to develop regulations for quality control standards for automated valuation models. While AVMs have seen broad adoption in certain segments of the housing market, we must be vigilant to ensure that they're not perpetuating the very biases they purport to address. The CFPB also recently posted a blog highlighting the critical role that lenders should play in facilitating consumer engagement in the home valuation process by maintaining a strong, compliant reconsideration value process, or ROV, that can serve an important role in helping to ensure accurate valuations. For example, in ROV, borrowers can point out errors or omissions, including inadequate comps or evidence of prohibited bias. The CFPB has communicated to lenders which fail to have a clear and consistent method to ensure that borrowers can seek an ROV or otherwise risk violating federal law. There is much work to be done. And today I want to highlight that the CFPB will be hosting the Appraisal Subcommittee for a hearing on January 24th. The purpose of the hearing is to keep the spotlight on the issue of appraisal bias, provide information on the role of the Appraisal Subcommittee in the regulatory system, and get feedback from key stakeholders and the public. We've invited stakeholders who represent different sides of the transaction: lender, appraiser, homeowner, and an academic who has analyzed available data. Based on the information gathered, the ASC may hold additional hearings on targeted topics. The hearing is open to the public, will be live streamed, and anyone can submit a written comment. I encourage all stakeholders, including appraisers, lenders, government regulators, civil rights advocates, and the general public, to attend. For more information and to register in advance, go to cfpb.gov and click on the events link. Lastly and importantly, I want to acknowledge the great work that Lisa Rice and NAPA have done to keep attention on this persistent challenge. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to read the report that Lisa referenced earlier. Thank you all for recognizing the responsibility and the roles the CFPB and the Appraisal Subcommittee have in addressing this challenge. It will take all of us.
Thank you, Zixib Martinez. I also want to thank a few more people, certainly the Honorable Maxine Waters, who you heard from earlier, the Honorable Marcia Fudge, and there are several other people, Chad Matthews, president of ABC-owned television stations, who was responsible for putting this documentary together. We also have Melody Taylor, who is in the House. What she's doing with PAVE is simply remarkable. And I also just want to thank NAFA as well. Lisa knows that this work requires a community coming together. And it's not just a community of housing advocates, it's a community of researchers, administrators, policymakers, homeowners, community members that may not all get along. But again, we see value in truth. And truth is somewhat of a twin sister of justice. You can't have one without the other. And if we're going to get to a place of justice, we need to fight for truth. And we're going to do that here at the Brookings Institution. And I need to also thank the team that have been working behind the scenes, the comm staff, the research staff, Jonathan Rothwell, my writing partner. I'm truly, a lucky man to be here before you. But again, I really hope that you continue to use this documentary, stream it as much as possible, share the link as much as possible. And again, thank you for coming through. It's been great.